Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Created Mind podcast, where we discuss psychology and its influence on culture from the Christian perspective. My name is Ashley Hagman. I'm a therapist and adjunct professor of psychology, and welcome back to the podcast. It's been a little bit of a break. I was moving and just kind of drowning with all that entailed and a lot more going on as well, and so I had to take a little bit of a break. But starting to get my feet back under me here. So I'm excited to get back in. So I several weeks ago listened on audiobook to The Death of Ivan Ilyich by Leo Tolstoy. And it's probably one of the most beautifully written things I've ever read. And it just, I haven't been able to stop thinking about it since then. So I feel like I need to talk about it and get it out and process it with you guys, just to fully absorb the beauty of this work and the thoughts that it produces. And I hope that it's beneficial for you guys and helps you ask the questions that you should be asking and thinking through the things that are good to think through. So, and this is classic literature, and it is Russian classic literature at that. So but it's short. And I think it's very accessible, especially listening on audiobook. I felt like I was able to follow it pretty easily. And I'll link a YouTube video for the reading that I was listening to. I felt like it was very well done and more engaging than I started listening to another version and was like, no, I'm not going to follow this. But this guy, I felt like had some good inflections. Anyway, so I'll link that. And I really challenge you guys to listen to it. It's not a very long listen, especially if you're doing other things while you're listening to it. But it's just so beautiful. So today I want to go through the narrative a little bit of the book and read some selections from it because it's just so beautifully written. And I feel like that's going to really drive home some of the points that I want to make. So we're going to go through the narrative, and then I'd like to talk a little bit about what this has meant to me and how I think it applies to counseling, to psychology, to sort of facing up to the suffering and the difficult times in our lives. These are the types of questions, the types of things that I often talk with my clients about. So I think it connects really well, and it's going to be a depressing discussion. I'm going to warn you right now, but it's the type of stuff that you need to face up to, that the only way out is through. And so I think it'll be a good discussion. If you get really sad, maybe take a break, but hopefully it won't be too bad. Anyways, so the book, The Death of Ivan Ilyich, is about, the death of Ivan Ilyich. So no secrets there. The title is not esoteric at all. But so it goes through the general narrative as it goes through his life and it goes through his death. And it gives a lot of his thoughts and his responses to his journey. But it doesn't actually begin following him. It begins following his friends, specifically a man named Peter Ivanovich and his other friend, Fyodor Vasilovich. Don't shoot me if you're Russian. I'm sure that pronunciation was terrible. But anyways, so Peter Ivanovich and Fyodor Vasilovich are having a discussion, and Peter says, Ivan Ilyich has died. And the reaction is, oh, you don't say. And then there's a discussion about, oh, well, I suppose that's pretty sad. But now I need to think about, so here's a quote, now I must apply for my brother-in-law's transfer from Kaluga. So it's a discussion of like, oh, well, he left a position open at work. So let me see if I can get my connections in. And it's talking about just the position that he left very quickly after his death to replace him. And then they talk about, oh, well, I suppose we're going to have to go visit the widow. Well, but that's so far away. And they're complaining about that. And then they go to his funeral. So Peter Ivanovich goes to his funeral, and his widow takes him aside and asks him, you were friends with my husband, right? And Peter Ivanovich actually replies, like, yes, we were. Fyodor Vasilovich and Peter Ivanovich were his nearest acquaintances. They grew up together. They went to law school together. They played bridge together. It's possible that these men were closer to him or spent more time with him, at least, than even his wife. As we'll see later in the story, that there wasn't a super great relationship with his wife. So these are probably the people in the world who were closest to him. And yet there's not really a particular sadness at his death. And so the widow's talking to Peter Ivanovich and basically just asking, yeah, it's so sad. And Peter was like, yeah, I suppose we'll have to find somebody else for a fifth for our card game, basically. That's like kind of the reaction. And then the widow is just asking, here's my pension. Here's how much they say I can make. Is there any way to get more money? Is that really true? Is that really all I'm going to get? And that is all she's going to get. But I mean, to be honest, for the story, that doesn't necessarily matter. What matters, what's so stark to me, is seeing that the reaction to this man's death between the people that knew him best, the people that he spent the most time with, is so frivolous and so selfish and not really all that sad. She does shed some tears in the story, especially at the end. But yeah, it's kind of heartbreaking to see this reaction. But it's definitely a foreshadow for what we're going to see through the story of the type of person that Ivan was and the journey that he goes on through the narrative of his life. So they have this conversation, and then it's time for the funeral. So Peter doesn't even really want to go into where the body is, but that's where he has to go for the funeral. And the entire time he's there for the service, he doesn't even glance at the body. He's just kind of going through the motions. He begins to have some thoughts that are uncomfortable about, well, what if this was me instead of Ivan? He was rather young, so what if this was me? But he pushes it away and comforts himself with the thought of, well, it's not me. It's Ivan, and so why should I worry about it? The questions come up, the questions start to poke their head out and start to niggle in his mind, but he pushes it away. He chooses not to think about it and to go about his life. So as soon as the funeral leaves, it says he leaves as soon as possible. He doesn't linger around. He, on the way out, encounters Gerasim, who is Ivan Ilyич's servant person, footman type of person. And he's a character that's going to come up later, so I think this is an important interaction here. And he says, well, friend Gerasim, said Peter Ivanovich, so as to say something, it's a sad affair, isn't it? It's God's will. We shall all come to it someday, said Gerasim, displaying his teeth, the even white teeth of a healthy peasant. And like a man in the thick of urgent work, he briskly opens the front door, called the coachman, helped Peter Ivanovich into the sledge, and sprang back to the porch as if in readiness for what he had to do next. So you see this interaction with Gerasim, where Gerasim is running headlong into the thought. He has this sort of comfort with the idea of death, of it's God's will, and we shall all come to it someday. I think that is an important line to remember as we look through what's going on there. And then the chapter ends, where to, he asks the coachman. It's not too late even now. I'll call round to Fyodor Vasilovich. He accordingly drove there and found them just finishing the first rubber, so that it was quite convenient for him to cut in. So he leaves his friend's funeral and he goes and lives his life just as his friend did, playing cards. Yeah, so the trajectory of his life is very similar, where we're focused on playing cards and career and avoiding the ideas of, or the thoughts of, death and discomfort. So that's the end of the sort of funeral scene, the introduction. For me, it was so beneficial after finishing the entire book to go back and read these interactions, because in the beginning you don't necessarily get a sense of, okay, who is this guy? What happened to him? And so you're trying to get clued in as you're reading this and try to get a sense of what's going on. But the meaning that comes out in these interactions in this first chapter is so it's so full once you've read the rest of the book. So I recommend going back and reading this first chapter after you finish the whole thing, because there's so much more that comes out of it when you kind of see like, oh wow, there's some significance to what's going on here. So then it goes into the history of Ivan Ilyich. So he was relatively privileged. He grew up in sort of a noble-ish household. He was a prosecutor and died at the age of 45, so relatively young. He was an official and good childhood, grew up, things were great. He went to law school and he married, and it was kind of a case of, it says in here, it's not accurate to say that he married purely for love or purely for social pressure, but it was kind of a case of somewhat both, not quite. So he married because it was the right thing to do, and also he He found a woman who suited him, who seemed lively, who seemed nice. He was attracted to her, but it wasn't this great love for her. And so they got married and things were okay at first. Then she had a child, things got real. It was kind of a case here where they were both making each other worse. So he was absent. He didn't want to be tied down. He wanted to be focused on his career and playing cards and having fun. And then she was nagging him a lot and just an unpleasant person to be around. And so then he would continue to avoid her. And so eventually they were just kind of living their lives parallel and not really a lot of interaction between them, except certain times they would have reunions, they would make up, they would be okay for a little bit, and then they would push came to shove, and really their relationship wasn't deep. It was dutiful, it was here and there, we enjoy each other, but we're not living life together. They were living separately. And it talks about he loved playing cards, he loved his job, so as a prosecutor, it was kind of a power trip. He climbed the ranks of in his career to be able to get to this point where anyone he accused, he could bring down. So it was a case of, like, even people who were, quote, more higher up than him in government, he had power over them because he could prosecute them. So he was just living this high of power, this high of just having fun, playing cards, and living his life. Well, then he begins to get ill. And at first it's just sort of vague, it's uncomfortable, he gets irritable, he just has these sort of vague symptoms. And he begins to start seeing some doctors, and and he starts to get worse. It begins to be this parade of doctors where he keeps going to this specialist who is highly celebrated. We heard about him. Let's go see him. And so he said, "Oh yes, you have this. You have this wrong with you. Here's the treatment. Let's do this treatment. You got to do the treatment. You got to stick to it, and it's gonna cure you." And he has a lot of hope. And he's like, "Yes, yes, I'll do the treatment." But it's not working. It's it's not really doing its job, and the wife blames him, like saying, "No, no, no, you're not doing the treatment well enough or consistently enough. Like, go take your medicine. That's what's wrong with you, is you're not doing it enough." But he keeps going to all these different doctors that say that they know what's wrong and giving him treatments, and nothing is really working. Nothing's really doing the trick, or it'll help a little bit, or it will help for a certain amount of time, and then it's not really panning out the way that he hoped. And man, if this isn't if this doesn't hit home for me, and I'm sure many others out there. So my husband has Lyme disease, and it's been such a journey walking through that with him. And I think it's kind of similar with a lot of illnesses out there that are chronic, that don't really have a great treatment protocol, and modern medicine hasn't really wrapped their heads around it. The medical system's really good at treating, like, acute Lyme, where, you've just got your tick bite and you can see the rash. They're relatively good at treating that, but the chronic Lyme is there's there's not a lot in the establishment of the medical community. And so then you go to all these alternative treatments, and some of them help, some of them don't. But either way, it's like you get your hope built up, and there's this treatment that someone says, "Yes, this is it. This is going to help you. Just stick to it. Just do the treatment." And of course, it's always relatively expensive. I mean, there's varying degrees, but there's things that help genuinely, and there's things that don't. And like, the situation is maybe a little different than Lyme in that it does end in his death, as we've already seen. But yeah, I think that it's so relatable if you've been through something like this, of the hope that you can have, and then it gets dashed. And then when that happens enough times, it's like it's hard for you to even hope, and you just kind of there's sometimes that you just kind of give up at a certain point. And everyone around you has an opinion of what you should be doing and the way you should be treating, and they think, if you just did this, it'd be okay. But yeah, it's hard. It's a really hard battle, and it gets to you mood-wise as well, and we're gonna see that through this, that he begins to get really irritable. Um, he's not getting a lot of empathy from his friends or his family. He just gets mad, and he starts pushing the way away even more. So he gets less empathy and even less sympathy, and he becomes very isolated from everyone. at first he sees it as their fault, and he's pushing it off on them as purely like I'm purely the victim here. They're at fault, and if they were just not so bad, I would be fine. I wouldn't be as irritable. I wouldn't be as struggling as much. But eventually we're going to see him come to an understanding of his own part in the interaction. And it's not just his fault. I want to be clear there. Obviously, no matter how your loved one treats you, if they're going through an illness, you need to have compassion for them. But there's a sense in which he begins to take stock of his own of the way that he's lived his life and the way that he's treated them before he got ill and during his illness, that sort of set this up to be to set this up for isolation, set this up for it's easy to cut him off emotionally. It's difficult to bear with him in his illness. So he begins to have this isolation. Everyone's sort of pulling away. And when they do come to visit him, it's more of this sense of duty. It's more of this like, well, I guess I should see my husband. Even his daughters, they come and maybe sit with him, but really he can sense they don't want to be there. And they don't really, and they're like impatient and they're upset with him. And so that, of course, makes him more angry and pushes them away. So he's pushed everyone away. He doesn't want anyone in with him except for going back to the character of Gerasim. So he's the footman, the servant, and he begins to have these interactions with Gerasim where he just really appreciates him because Gerasim sees his suffering and sees his illness. And Gerasim himself, he's a peasant. He's not a man of privilege. He is dealing with Ivan, and Ivan is being very demanding of him. And yet he does everything with a smile. And he just has this joy of life. It says, and restraining the joy of life that beamed from his face, he went up to the commode. So he like is going up and helping his master and being treated terribly, to be honest, and yet just has this joy and has this internal sense of well-being and peace and happiness. And it's such a comfort to Ivan and yet very confusing to Ivan. So the only person he wants around is Gerasim, and he begins to sort of invent reasons to keep Gerasim around. So it's kind of like, here, come and put this footstool under my feet. I need you to do that. I need you to do this. I need you to move me here and move me there. To have him around because he's really the only person in his life that doesn't hate being there with him, which I think is, yeah, that's powerful. And it's powerful the witness that you can be in someone's life when they're used to having everyone pushed away, but you genuinely are happy to be there with them. I think that is incredibly powerful there. So his illness continues to progress. He continues to get all these treatments, and it's not really working. And he starts to pull away even from playing cards, from going to work, the things that he's doing. And he begins to wrestle with, when you can't go out into the world anymore. You can't do the things that distracted you, can't do your entertainments, and you're just kind of holed up by yourself. The questions that were sort of always there in your mind really start to come out. You can't push them down anymore. You can't distract anymore, and you're confronted with it. And that's kind of what happens here is he's stuck on his sick bed, and all of a sudden all of these questions. And then when you're faced with suffering too, your concept of life, your concept of your purpose and the meaning of your life starts to come out in these questions, especially when you're facing death too. Just the ideas of, why am I here? What am I living for? Why am I so miserable? How can I deal with this? What's going on? Just really begins to come out. And I want to read for you. It's a relatively long section, but I think it just really highlights the internal struggle that he's going through and the questions that he's starting to face. And actually, you see him start to ask them, and through this sort of internal dialogue, you see him start to ask them, you see him pull away, you see him start to ask and pull away. And here is one of the sections that he really is starting to dive into this, but at the end, we're going to see him pull away again. "Go away, Gerasim," he whispered. "It's all right, sir. I'll stay a while." "No, go away." He removed his legs from Gerasim's shoulders, turned sideways onto his arm, and felt sorry for himself. He only waited till Gerasim had gone into the next room and then restrained himself no longer, but wept like a child. He wept on account of his helplessness, his terrible loneliness, the cruelty of man, the cruelty of God, and the absence of God. Why hast thou done all this? Why hast thou brought me here? Why? Why dost thou torment me so terribly? He did not expect an answer, and yet wept because there was no answer and could be none. The pain again grew more acute, but he did not stir and did not call. He said to himself, "Go on, strike me. But what is it for? What have I done to thee? What is it for?" Then he grew quiet, and not only ceased weeping, but even held his breath, and became all attention. It was as though he were listening not to an audible voice, but to the voice of his soul, to the current thoughts arising within him. "What is it you want?" was the first clear conception capable of expression in words that he heard. "What do you want? What do you want?" he repeated to himself. "What do I want? To live and not to suffer," he answered. And again he listened with such concentrated attention that even his pain did not distract him. "To live? How?" asked his inner voice. "Why, to live as I used to, well and pleasantly." "As you lived before, well and pleasantly?" the voice repeated. And in imagination he began to recall the best moments of his pleasant life. But strange to say, none of those best moments of his pleasant life now seemed at all what they had then seemed. None of them except the first recollections of his childhood. There in his childhood there had been something really pleasant with which it would be possible to live if it could return. But the child who had experienced that happiness existed no longer. It was like a reminiscence of somebody else. As soon as the period began which had produced the present Ivan Ilyich, all that had then seemed joyous now melted before his sight, and turned into something trivial and often nasty. And the further he departed from his childhood, and the nearer he came to the present, the more worthless and doubtful were the joys. This began with the school of law. A little that was really good was still found there. There was lightheartedness, friendship, and hope. But in the upper classes there had already been fewer of such good moments. Then during the first years of his official career, when he was in the service of the governor, some pleasant moments again occurred. There were the memories of love for a woman. Then all became confused because there was still less of what was good. Later on again, there was still less that was good. And the further he went, the less there was. His marriage, a mere accident. Then the disenchantment that followed it. His wife's bad breath and the sensuality and hypocrisy. Then that deadly official life and those preoccupations about money, a year of it and 2 and 10 and 20, and always the same thing. And the longer it lasted, the more deadly it became. It is as if I had been going downhill while I imagined I was going up. And that is really what it was. I was going up in public opinion, but to the same extent, life was ebbing away from me. And now it is all done, and there's only death. Then what does it mean? Why? It can't be that life is so senseless and horrible. But if it really has been so horrible and senseless, why must I die and die in agony? There is something wrong. Maybe I did not live as I ought to have done, it suddenly occurred to him. But how could that be? When I did everything properly, he replied, and immediately dismissed from his mind this, the sole solution of all the riddles of life and death, as something quite impossible. Then what do you want now? To live? Live how? Live as you lived in the law courts when the usher proclaimed, "The judge is coming, the judge is coming, the judge." He repeated to himself, "Here he is, the judge. But I am not guilty," he exclaimed angrily. "What is it for?" And he ceased crying, but turned his face to the wall, continued to ponder on the same question. Why, and for what purpose, is there all this horror? But however much he pondered, he found no answer. And whenever the thought occurred to him, as it often did, that it all resulted from him not having lived as he ought to have done, he at once recalled the correctness of his whole life and dismissed so strange an idea. So here we have it occurring to him, all of the things that were pleasant, that were good in his life, now are sort of turning to dust. He's realizing the meaninglessness of it. There were things in his early childhood that were genuinely good, but those, when you're a child, the good things of your life aren't necessarily products of your own choice and of your own trajectory in life. They're usually the products of your parents. And so the times in his life when it actually came down to him and to his choice and the way that he lived his life and the trajectory of his own will, everything began to get worse and worse and worse. And as each test came to him, as each stage of life came to him, things began worse and worse, even though he didn't realize it. He thought, again, it's like, how could my life go downhill while I imagined it was going up? So in the eyes of society, in the eyes of himself, things were getting better. He was doing better. He was succeeding in life. He was succeeding in his career. He was having a lot of fun. He was having a lot of money. He had kids and a family and everything. He did everything he was supposed to, is what he said. But then he begins to question, maybe I didn't live as I should have. Maybe there's something about the way that I've lived my life that isn't right, that is missing the mark. But he pushes it away. Again, he's starting to dive into these questions a little bit more, but he's still just pushing it away. He's still distracting. He's still not completely following this to the end and not submitting to these thoughts and continuing on with the discussion. And he continues to ask, like, why these sufferings? Why am I suffering? Why am I going through this? What is the reason for this? And it's kind of a sense of there has to be, he's feeling there has to be a reason, but if there's no, I mean, in my mind, I don't think it really explicitly goes through this, but if there is no God, then there is no reason to this of why you're suffering. But at the same time, if they're suffering for no reason, that just doesn't make sense. It makes no sense. They just are. They just are what they are. I'm just suffering because. And he continues to say, there is no explanation, agony, death, what for? He's just wrestling with the why of what's going on. And yet he continues to shy away from the real why of what's going on. So his illness progresses. He continues to get worse. He's in almost constant pain and just really terrible. And everyone is miserable around him and struggling. So finally he is forced to consider that, okay, maybe I haven't lived my life as I should. And then he realizes, yeah, no, I was wrong. I wasted my life. I didn't treat my family as I should have. I pushed everyone away. I lived my life for myself. I did wrong, and it wrecks him. And so now it's just the sense of not only is he suffering physically, not only is he suffering emotionally, but now he's suffering spiritually because he's beginning to be convicted with this shame and guilt over the way that he's lived his life. But what can he do? He can't change it now. He's literally on his deathbed. I think this highlights something that's really important. And I've talked about this, I think, before, is that the experience of having regret or shame or guilt over what we've done in our lives and the way that we've lived our lives is not enough to bring about the good. It's not enough to bring about behavioral changes. So if you're trying to drum up a guilt, you're trying to drum up this negative feeling in order to propel yourself into good, positive change, it's just not going to work. Maybe for a little bit it will, but that's a piece of the puzzle. You do need to have a sense of where you've gone wrong in the past. It's wrong to be in complete denial and to say, I've done nothing wrong and nothing is wrong and it's just everybody else's fault and it's not ever my fault in any way. That is not healthy. So you need to have a sense of, hey, there is something in my life and my experience that I've done that is wrong or is not best or that needs to change. But that in itself is not going to bring about peace. It's not going to bring about joy or life. It's not going to bring about the types of true soul deep change that needs to happen. And so he goes through this now moral suffering as he begins to realize that he lived his life wrongly. And so he starts to talk about that with his wife, and his wife is like, well, just go get communion. We'll have the priest come, take communion. Everything will be okay. You'll feel better. And so he does. And the priest comes, he takes communion, and it kind of ignites this hope again, He starts to hope again in the medication. He starts to think, oh, maybe it is what the doctor said. Maybe it is this, what was it, floating appendix, floating kidney or something like that. They diagnosed him with these old-timey explanations for illnesses. And maybe if I do my treatment, maybe if I do take the medications, I will. But it's this hope that's this sort of like manic hope. It's not like, so I don't know how to explain it. I think maybe there's got to be another word for it, but there's a hope that's this life-giving, truly deep, positive, peaceful sort of hope. And then there's this hope that's this manic, uncomfortable hope that is, yeah, this is gonna do it. This is gonna do it. And it's a feverish sort of thing. And that's what he experiences, but then very quickly realizes, no, I'm dying. This is not working. I don't have a hope. So he did the thing. He did all, again, he's doing, quote, the right thing to do. He took communion. He did the right thing to do. And he's looking to that to help. And it helps for a second. It helps him feel better for a second, but not in a truly deep well-being sort of way. From then, he's really on his deathbed at this point. And it says, from that moment, the screaming began that continued for 3 days and was so terrible that no one could not hear it through 2 closed doors without horror. So he's just literally screaming for 3 whole days as he's just struggling. And it's pain. It's a lot of pain. But it's also, again, it's this emotional suffering, physical suffering, and spiritual suffering that is just, the weight of it is so much. And I can't imagine this experience that he's going through. And all of that going together, I think something that when it comes to our strugglings here on the earth, I think a lot of people try to chop them up into one or the other of physical, spiritual, or emotional. So, like, okay, so this is something that's physically wrong with you, or this is something that's a mental health issue that's emotionally wrong with you. Maybe there's a physical component, or they'll say it's just a physical component, or it's just psychological, or it's just spiritual. And I think it's really unhelpful and really wrong to try to chop it up that way, because I think when we're going through suffering, very rarely is it purely one thing. Especially with mental health, there's so much physically that contributes to our mental health. It's pretty ridiculous. There's so many studies that have shown things like, for example, exercise, cardio exercise does better for mental health than, or just as well as, some mental health medications. So there's obviously a physical component to what's going on, but then there's times where it's like you can't find anything physically wrong with this person, and yet they're experiencing these symptoms. I think there is, and our thoughts, the way that we think actually impacts our physical being. Thought patterns actually literally impact the way our body works. And I don't have time in this podcast to go through that, but there's huge. And then spiritually as well, there are spiritual realities that impact our emotions, that impact our thoughts, that impact us physically. So when we consider suffering, I think it's important to consider all of those aspects of the suffering when we consider health as well, to consider all of those aspects. So the problem is all three, and the solution should be all three as well. Anyway, so he's just in a state of absolute suffering, and it's described very well. And then we get to his final deathbed, and I want to read to you the final. This is going to be a longer passage. It's probably one of the most beautiful things I've ever read, and just hit me in an incredible way. For 3 whole days, during which time did not exist for him, he struggled in that black sack into which he was being thrust by an invisible, resistless force. He struggled as a man condemned to death struggles in the hands of the executioner, knowing that he cannot save himself. And every moment he felt that despite all his efforts, he was drawn nearer and nearer to what terrified him. He felt that his agony was due to his being thrust into that black hole, and still more to his not being able to get right into it. He was hindered from getting into it by his conviction that his life had been a good one. That very justification of his life held him fast and prevented him from moving forward, and it caused him most torment of all. Suddenly, some force struck him in the chest and side, making it still harder to breathe, and he felt through the hole, and there at the bottom was a light. What had happened to him was like the sensation one sometimes experiences in a railway carriage, when one thinks one is going backwards while one is really going forwards, and suddenly becomes aware of the real direction. Yes, it was not the right thing, he said to himself, but that's no matter. It can be done, but what is the right thing, he asked himself, and suddenly grew quiet. This occurred at the end of the 3rd day, 2 hours before his death. Just then his schoolboy son had crept softly in and gone up to the bedside. The dying man was still screaming desperately and waving his arms. His hand fell on the boy's head, and the boy caught it, pressed it to his lips, and began to cry. At that very moment, Ivan Ilyich fell through and caught sight of the light, and it was revealed to him that though his life had not been what it should have been, this could still be rectified. He asked himself, what is the right thing? And he grew still, listening. Then he felt that someone was kissing his hand. He opened his eyes, looked at his son, and felt sorry for him. His wife came up to him, and he glanced at her. She was gazing at him, open-mouthed, with undried tears on her nose and cheek, and a despairing look on her face. He felt sorry for her, too. Yes, I am making them wretched, he thought. They are sorry, but it will be better for them when I die. He wished to say this, but had not the strength to utter it. Besides, why speak? I must act, he thought. With a look at his wife, he indicated his son and said, take him away. Sorry for him. Sorry for you too. He tried to add, forgive me, but said, forgo, and waved his hand, knowing that he whose understanding mattered would understand. And suddenly it grew clear to him that what had been oppressing him and would not leave him was all dropping away at once from 2 sides, from 10 sides, from all sides. He was sorry for them. He must act so as not to hurt them, release them, and free himself from these sufferings. How good and how simple, he thought. And the pain, he asked himself, what has become of it? Where are you, pain? He turned his attention to it. Yes, here it is. Well, what of it? Let the pain be. And death, where is it? He sought his former accustomed fear of death and did not find it. Where is it? What death? There was no fear because there was no death. In place of death, there was light. So that's what it is, he exclaimed aloud. What joy! To him, all of this happened in a single instant, and the meaning of that instant did not change. For those present, his agony continued for another 2 hours. Something rattled in his throat, his emaciated body twitched. Then the gasping and rattle became less and less frequent. It is finished, said someone near him. He heard these words and repeated them in his soul. Death is finished, he said to himself. It is no more. He drew in a breath, stopped in the midst of a sigh, stretched out, and died. Just so beautiful. um, it brings me to tears to see he's finally confronting this. He's finally confronting his suffering. He's admitting where he was wrong. And it says, knowing that he whose understanding mattered most would understand. So he's asking for forgiveness. He's asking it of his wife and his son. But really, he's asking it of God. And you hear that true repentance and the peace that comes from that. It's not just the regret and the shame for doing something wrong, but giving it to God and asking for true forgiveness. And you see from that moment, suddenly, it becomes clear to him what was oppressing him, and it just drops away. His suffering, his fear of death just drops away from him. And that's not to say that the pain was still there. It says, first he's like, okay, where is it? But then he knows it's still there. But it's sort of this, he's wrapped his mind around it and is okay with it. And it says, well, here it is, let it be. And death is still there. He's still going to die. But the fear of it is gone. So he's still in physical agony. I mean, you can see it. It says, for those present, his agony continued for another 2 hours, but his internal experience of it shifts and changes. And it's just so beautiful. There was no fear because there was no death. In the place of death, there was light. And I think that just so describes the Christian hope that we have in the face of death and meaninglessness of life. No, we do have hope, a true hope that comes with peace, that comes with just a sense of well-being and stillness in our souls and an acceptance of our suffering that comes with this internal sense of joy. And I think that going through the hard things that I've gone through this life, especially like the past year and a half, has been really hard for me and my family. I think, it's so easy to keep thinking, I will feel better when. I'll feel better when my circumstances are better. I'll feel better when Grant is healed. I'll feel better when I'm not pregnant anymore. When I was pregnant. Like, I'll feel better next week when my class is finished, when things slow down, when I'm not so stressed. But the reality of life is, I mean, there's things that you can do, obviously, that can help improve your life. I can reduce my stress load, I can do certain things. But in general, if you're waiting for those external things to be better in order to be okay, it's just not going to happen. Your sense of well-being cannot be rooted in your circumstances. I don't think it can really be rooted 100% in your own actions either, because here is somebody on his deathbed. He can't. He can't even speak. Like, he can't even get the words out. He can't even ask for forgiveness from his wife and kids. So it can't be rooted in what you can do either. Your sense of well-being can't be rooted in your abilities. It has to be rooted in something else. And I would say that that something else is Christ. You have to have the sense of, no matter what I face, I can be okay because my well-being is in the eternal, unchanging, loving God. And my hope is in something better, be it in this kingdom or the next. There is something good for me. And death is not all there is. There is something on the other side. That is that source of well-being, that source of joy, that source of peace and hope that is truly life-giving. And to me, yeah, it's a constant battle with myself to be in that place where I can be okay even in my suffering, and I can say it is well with my soul. And then in the end, I just love, it echoes to Christ's final words on the cross: "It is finished. Death is finished. It is no more." So that, yeah, like that, oh my gosh, it's just so beautiful. So that's the hope of Christ on the cross. He took our suffering, he took our shame, he took death, and he nailed it to the cross, and it is finished. It's just so beautiful. And this really connects with a lot of things that I've been reading in my own devotions, talking with people, with even like the sermons at our church. So right now we're going through the Beatitudes. I wasn't here for this sermon, but my husband was telling me about it, and it just completely rocked my world. But our pastor was talking about how, it says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit." The word blessed there isn't just happy. It doesn't just mean like happy are these people, or, oh, this is a nice thing to do. It's a sense of the good life is for, and it's totally turning on its head our notion of what is the good life. The good life for now, not just our future hope. What is living the good life now? And the good life is for the poor in spirit. The good life is for those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. So it's this sense of, it is the good life now for those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. So when I am going through my struggle and I am mourning, this is the good life now, because I can look forward to this beautiful hope of the comfort that I have in Christ, for I will be comforted. And so that completely rocked my world, of the sense of facing up to my suffering, not trying to ignore it, not trying to say everything's hunky-dory, because that's easy to do too, is say, oh, it's not so bad, push it away and not really feel it. No, it sucks. It's not good. Things are not okay. Death and suffering is wrong. We need to face up to that. We need to look at it full in the face and have a sense of that. We need to mourn, but blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. It's something that's really hit me today. It's something that I work through with my clients about, discussing the part about your well-being can't be rooted in your circumstances. It can't even be rooted in your abilities. It needs to be rooted in something else. And with those with faith, it's much easier, because of course we have the commonality of working towards Christ as that sense of well-being and that rootedness. But even with those who don't have faith, pushing them to ask these questions, pushing them to ask the questions, you're suffering, and there's no guarantee that your life is going to be good. There's no guarantee that tomorrow you won't face a cancer diagnosis. This life, you are going to suffer in one way or another. It's going to happen to you. No one gets through life without any kind of suffering. You're going to suffer, and everyone is going to die. You are going to die, and you need to stop trying to push those thoughts away and think of something nicer. You need to face up to it and to ask the question, why am I living? What is the point of my life? What am I working towards here? What are we doing here? If I'm just here 1 minute and gone the next, if I'm struggling for things that aren't even my fault, or even if they were my fault, what can I do about that now? you need to ask those questions. You need to ask your why. You need to have this sense of meaning. And so I really try to push people to face up to those things, to ask those deep questions, because that's going to be where, once you have your meaning, once you have your why, that's when you can finally have a conceptualization of your suffering, and to be able to be okay and get through it. Viktor Frankl wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning that is probably one of the most influential books that I've read in my life. And he does not have faith, but he talks about, he lived through the concentration camps and just talked about observing the people who lived, even though they were going through everything. He said, honestly, it was a state of mind that was the difference between life and death at times, because you were hanging on by such a string. He said that those who lived, they had a reason why. And he said those who have a why can face almost anyhow. So that's what I really try and push with my clients. And I hope, of course, that the answer that they come to is Christ. But yeah, I push people to try and understand, conceptualize your life, ask those questions, deal with this, stop trying to push it away, stop trying to deep breathe your way into feeling okay. It's going to work for a second, but it's not going to be. I love deep breathing, I'm going to say that, but that's not the solution to your problems. It's not going to be this deep sense of meaning that you can make out of your suffering, and that you can discover out of your suffering. Now, I'd like to leave you guys with a hymn that's definitely one of my favorite hymns. I want this to be sung at my funeral. It is a common funeral song, though. And it's so beautiful. When peace like a river attends my way, when sorrow like sea billows roll, whatever my lot, you have taught me to say, it is well with my soul. So that's my prayer for you as you go through your life, as you face the sufferings that you're going to face, because they're going to happen. Not that should lead you to despair, but that it should lead you to meaning, that it should lead you to asking the deep questions and clinging to the true hope in every part of your life. When things are good, when peace like a river attends my way, but also when sorrows like sea billows roll. Whatever God has for you, whatever there is in your life, I pray that you will say, it is well with my soul.